part of DU's Center for Judaic Studies. And I'm here to let you know about the event that you have all come to. Thank you very much for attending. The Center for Judaic Studies at the University of Denver houses what we call the Holocaust Awareness Institute, which is the acronym's HAI, and we're very pleased tonight to be supporting this program and this wonderful film. Our Center for Judaic Studies and HAI provide lots of opportunities for Holocaust education within the Denver community, beyond the borders of DU. We also help to co-sponsor this film screening this evening, which will follow this evening's program. And tonight also marks an important collaboration with the Holocaust Awareness Institute and the Center for Art Collection Ethics, ACE, which works on such topics as looted Nazi art, and this is under the expert leadership of Dr. Elizabeth Campbell, who will be participating tonight in the interview with Roberta. Elizabeth Campbell, who I'll introduce, do you want to come on? She's in our faculty in the Department of History. She's the new director of our Center for Art Collection Ethics, ACE, which is actually a great acronym. ACE is co-sponsored by the HAI and investigates, as you might suggest from the name, ethical issues involved in the collection of art and its provenance. Her first book, Defending National Treasures, French Art and Heritage under Vichy, was published by Stanford University Press in 2011. And it examines French cultural policy during the German occupation. Drawing on research in French archives, the book reveals how French efforts to acquire permanently for the Louvre and other state-run museums arts from Jewish collections that were declared sort of national treasures, although they were taken from Jewish families. Her current book project focuses on the Allied recovery of art that had been looted from Jewish collections by the Nazis or sold under duress during the occupation of various European countries, and compares the restitution practices in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. In all three of these nations, post-war governments held unclaimed works for display in state-run museums, which has set the stage for continuing controversy and ongoing litigation even today. And Dr. Campbell has provided commentary on Nazi art looting in a variety of high-profile media outlets, including the New York Times, the LA Times, Slate, Newsweek, and Time. And then please let me introduce our wonderful filmmaker tonight, Roberta Grossman. She's an award-winning filmmaker with a passion for history and social justice. I was fortunate enough to spend dinner with both of them, and you're in for a real treat. A wonderful interview, I'm sure, will ensue. Roberta wrote and produced and directed Who Will Write Our History? And she's written, directed, and produced more than 40 hours of film and television. In 2018, she co-directed the Netflix original documentary, which you can still find on Netflix, and you can sit down if you want to, but you don't have to. I didn't mean it for it to be that formal. And this great documentary, Seeing Allred, is about the women's rights attorney Gloria Allred, who famously defended, not defended, but she famously represented many of the women who were raped by Bill Cosby. Seeing Allred premiered in competition at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival and was described as remarkably engaging by the New York Times and the perfect companion to the Me Too movement by Variety magazine. She is currently producing All This Life, The Many Worlds of Roman Vishniak. In 2014, Grossman directed Above and Beyond for producer Nancy Spielberg. This is a great film about American Jewish World War II pilots that really helped set the stage for Israel's contemporary Air Force. And this premiered in 20 festivals around the world, or was shown at more than 20 festivals around the world. And in 2012, her film Hava Nagila, the movie, used the song as a portal to examine about 50 years of Jewish history, culture, and spirituality, and was selected as a closing or the opening film at more than 30 film festivals around the world. So we have an expert here in art collection. We have an expert filmmaker here, and I think you can all join me in welcoming Roberta and Dr. Campbell tonight. Thank you.
Before you start, can I ask a housekeeping question? These lights are super bright. It's hard to see the audience. I'm wondering if there's any way to
We can just turn them completely off, just these side ones.
Yeah.
They're blinding.
I'll get them.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Adam, and thank you, Roberta, for being here tonight. It is such a privilege to have you here with us. I think it's probably safe to say that most people have not had the opportunity to see the film. Is that correct? Has anyone seen the film? Oh, and person there. And the mic is working fine? You all hearing me okay? All right, great. Our program is a bit unusual this evening. Normally in a talk back, there's a chance to talk with a director after you have seen the film. So we've reversed the order a bit with the later screening, but I know that we'll be able to have a really interesting discussion. And I would think this conversation will make it even more meaningful when you do see the film. So Who Will Write Our History already has had a global audience. So on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th, it was screened in, there were 355 screenings in 55 countries on that day, which is very impressive. Throughout Europe, in Africa, Ghana, Asia, in India, so there was a very impressive effort to have a global distribution on a very important symbolic day of Holocaust Remembrance Day. So first, I'm just interested in how you secured that global distribution.
So it was hand-cranked, handmade. It involved people in my office, our distributor, a very small distributor out of New York, and we hired one person who produced the anchor screening at UNESCO, because that was shot, the post-screening discussion was filmed for Facebook Live transmission. So we had 3 venues that were both able to transmit to us and ask questions to us. So that was the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum in DC, the Jewish Historical Institute in Poland, and the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. So that was a very technical, huge to-do and expensive, so we raised the money for it. And then I had somebody in my office in Los Angeles who was trying to create non-theatrical screenings in museums and that kind of thing. Because I made so many Jewish films, I have a really large email list. And so we sent out emails to like 10,000 people saying that we were doing this global screening and inviting anyone from somebody in their home with 10 people to a movie theater with 1,200 to screen the film, and if they wanted they had internet to screen the post-screening discussion. So people picked up on it, and it kind of was one of those things when the ball started rolling down the hill. It went faster and faster, and more people came involved. So many screenings, in fact, there were so many screenings that came at the last minute that we had to say no because we couldn't properly service them all. So we're doing an encore of sorts without the Facebook Live component, which was so complicated, for Yom HaShoah, which of course we commemorate in North America and Israel, the Holocaust and Yom HaShoah. So we haven't even started really to reach out for that, and we have 70 screenings. The film is really resonating with people. So you can work as hard as you want and crank the wheel as hard as you want, but unless people are responding, nothing happens. And the reason why we were able to have such a wide reach is because of international organizations that supported us. The Joint Distribution Committee sent out the film to their branches all over the world. Same thing with the World Jewish Congress, the UN, UNESCO, and I think those were the main organizations. But that's how we got that reach. But this is the kind of cooperation and intergroup cooperation around a single project that we all dream of, but almost never happens.
And do you think there's a reason that these various international organizations and UNESCO, can you point to reasons why this is good timing for these organizations to support the film?
So some of the organizations are directly involved in the subject matter. You'll see when you see the film tonight, at the end, that the Ringelblum Archive, the Onyx Shabbos Archive, was brought into the UNESCO's Memory of the World Registry in, I think, 1999. It was 3 collections from Poland, the scores of Chopin, the writings of Copernicus, and the Onyx Shabbos Archive. So they had a vested interest in it. The Joint Distribution Committee, the Joint, basically funded the archive in the ghetto, as well as most of the self-help in the ghetto. The World Jewish Congress, I don't know, they got on board a long time ago. But the moment for the film, my feeling is it's like bad for the world, good for the film, because the film is about a group of people who were literally willing to die for the truth at a time when journalists and others who seek the truth are being murdered, and when from the highest levels of government, not only in our own country, but in other countries as well, are trafficking in endless falsehoods. These people who was so important to tell the truth to future generations, it's really resonating.
I was able to see the film, and it is incredibly powerful, so this will be a very meaningful experience. So since you all are here, I assume you probably know the central story that's being addressed. So this group of around 60 writers and scholars, local leaders, who were determined that the world should know about the suffering of the Jewish people in the Warsaw Ghetto, and collected a wide variety of documents, eyewitness accounts, diary entries, newspaper clippings, drawings, and a wide range of texts that would be able to show the world what they had been experiencing. We're being careful not to give away too much leading into it. So this is the central story and how these documents survive and are discovered at the end of the war, after the war. So you have also said that this has remained a largely unknown story, and you've even said that you think it is the most important unknown story in the Holocaust. So why do you believe it is so important?
So I do believe that. I believe that when I started on the film about, 7-10 years ago, and I believe it even more today. I was working on another film when I read a review of Sam Cass's book, Who Will Write Our History, and that review called Sam's book a work of historical rescue. I went and got the book. That was still 10 years ago. We still went and got books. Within 10 pages, I was absolutely outraged. And I was outraged because I've spent my whole life obsessing about the Holocaust, reading about it, learning about it, and I'd never heard of the Onyx Shabbos Archive. And to me, this is the Dead Sea Scrolls coming out of the rubble of the ghetto. With the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have a beautiful museum in Jerusalem. We've had scholars have been studying it, for decades now. But the Onyx Shabbos, which I think is certainly comparable in its importance, remained somewhat buried. Why? Is that was your question? Why? Or is that a question? Or why do I think it's so important? I think it's so important because this was a group of people who, they started out not with prescience so much, but with the desire to collect first-person, what are they called, primary documents, from which they and other historians could write the history of the war from the Jewish point of view after the war. As time went on, things quickly devolved into, the floor kept on dropping out from nightmare to bad nightmare to really bad nightmare. They realized that very few people, anyone would survive, and so they wanted the story to be told from their point of view once it was told, because it was the Germans' intention, as many of you I'm sure know, not only to wipe out the Jewish people, but to wipe out their memory and their culture as well. And they were portraying through their writing, through their propaganda. There were cameramen in the ghetto constantly, which is written about in the various diaries that are in the archive. Their goal was to portray the Jews as subhuman, so that then the Nazis would seem glorious in their efforts to wipe them out. It's sort of like creating these terrible conditions of poverty and hunger, and then showing filth and lack of sanitary conditions and disease, crowding, and to create those conditions and then show the Jews in those conditions and say, see, look how subhuman they are. It's almost like declaring an emergency for a humanitarian crisis on the border that you yourself have created. I don't mean to be so political, but there are echoes. So I think it's very important because Ringelblum essentially created a high-level, sophisticated research institute in the very depth of hell. Not only were they collecting things, but the executive committee would sit around, perhaps as an academic, and appreciate this. And about 2 years into the ghetto, they were embarked on a very elaborate program called the 2-year program, which is not mentioned in the film at all. But it was essays, and assigning essays to various writers on all possible topics. And it wasn't just like, you write about women in the ghetto. They would create these outlines with 50 points that they would then give to the person who's writing it. So it was very well thought out. Some, people, when I'm telling people about the film, or when I was starting to make the film, people would say, oh God, not another film about the Holocaust. And I would say, well, have you ever heard of Anne Frank's diary? Which is, of course, a facetious question, because I don't think there's anybody alive who's over 5 who hasn't heard of Anne Frank's diary. I believe, you could probably correct me, but I think it's the most published book after the Bible. But the Onyx Shabbos archive has dozens of diaries in it that are quite powerful. So that's why I think it's so important, because it tells the story. It's eyewitness accounts, and there's a tremendous difference between survivor accounts, however they're invaluable and so important. But Sam Casso often has said in our Q&As that we've done as we've gone around with the film, he said, if you survive the war, let's say you're a Polish Jew and you survive 6 years in the war, you're probably going to remember the end. Maybe if the end was in a camp like Auschwitz, you'll remember how I survived. You're not going to remember the day in the ghetto when 50 people were killed all in one night by the Nazis, and they all seemed to be involved in cultural work or somehow. You're not going to talk about that. You're not going to talk about what it was like for people who smuggled themselves out of the ghetto to get food to bring back into the ghetto. So all these details, or the struggle for religious Jews to maintain their observance, all these details are lost in eyewitness accounts. These are accounts that are written without knowledge of how the story is going to end, and they're day by day.
So then, do you have thoughts on why this story hasn't been remembered? I mean, we can think about Polish national memory and how the story of the war was told in Poland after the war. We can think about this in terms of Jewish memory, also considering the fact of the decimation of the Polish Jewish population, but then also in terms of Israeli history and memory. So do you have thoughts on that, and why it's been excluded from?
So the archive didn't fit in with prevailing narratives. So there's several reasons, I think. None of this is my original thinking. This all comes to me from my teachers, Sam Casso and David Roskis, who are in the film, and Jan Gross, and Robert Kirschenbach Gimlet. Number one, the archive was primarily written in Polish and Yiddish, and these were not the languages of international scholarship. So translation came very slowly. They just now completed at the Jewish Historical Institute, where the archive's been housed, just now, last year, or maybe this year, completed publishing 31 volumes of the archive translated into Polish. They're just starting the English volumes. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, the archive stayed in Poland, stayed in Warsaw behind the Iron Curtain. And often they were, really laying low, right? And the Soviet period was not, a particularly Jewish-friendly period. So there was a lot of laying low that the archive did in different historical eras. And behind the Iron Curtain, it wasn't until the fall of the Berlin Wall that there were the resources coming from the West to properly digitize the archive, preserve it, and start, transmitting it, really transmitting it. More interesting reasons, the archive is too darn honest. There are Jewish prostitutes, there's Jewish police, Ringelblum and his associates hated the Judenrat. Ringelblum writes in his daily diary that at one point, also not in the film, there's been a tremendous loss of kinship values, the value of kinship in the ghetto. You said the Gestapo break into an apartment, go right to a particular painting, pull it off the wall, and there they find the family's last remaining valuables. Who but a family member would know where those were hidden? So this is not what people wanted after the war. And even when some of this became public, people rejected it as not true. Rabbi Huberman writes about, as one of the members of the Oneg Shabbos, who was a Hasidic Rebbe, he writes about drunk Hasidic boys in the streets. And when it was translated or his writings were published, the sect that he belonged to, which I can't even think of what it is right now, they said, it's not true, this is a fraud, this is a forgery. Right? It was unassimilable. David Otrowski says this word I can't say. People could not assimilate it. I won't try to say the word that way, other way. Then there's the issue of national memory, right? So in Israel and in the United States, people were just, the Jewish people in particular, were grappling with this massive loss of 6 million Jews, and it was a tragedy that we're still grappling with. And, it's not just the tragedy of the Jews, but the tragedy of humanity. So things got simplified. In Israel, there were martyrs and there were heroes. Everyone who died was a martyr, and then the heroes were those who fought the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which is why we commemorate Yom HaShoah is connected to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The International Holocaust Remembrance Day is connected to the liberation of Auschwitz by the Russian troops on January 27, 1945. So in Israel, those who fought in the ghetto and other partisans, those were the heroes. This kind of very diaspora activity of writing and collecting and writing poetry. They collected poetry and songs and jokes and the chants of beggars and newspapers. This was too diaspora-ish in Israel. It was rejected, along with the rest of the diaspora. And plus, most of the members of the Oneg Shabbos spoke Yiddish. As you know, that was rejected as well, even though many of them were Zionists. So it's very complex.
And it seems that you're also highlighting a different notion of resistance. So this group of scholars were using the power of the pen and collecting other various types of material, which doesn't align neatly with more the heroic armed resistance, and that's how resistance was defined, as opposed to using writings and collecting.
Right. Well, Yehuda Bauer talks about great scholar of the Holocaust talks about different layers or levels of resistance, all of which I can't remember. But spiritual resistance is certainly one level of resistance. I know for me, I feel like if I had been there, I would have, within 3 days, curled up in a corner and not gotten up again. So I think, parents who somehow manage to keep themselves together and feed their children, that's a form of resistance. The people who ran underground schools for Jewish children, that's resistance. Those who put on concerts, musical concerts, and theatrical concerts, that's resistance. Ringelblum himself said in his essay on the Oneg Shabbos, he really talks about culture in opposition to the barbarism of the Nazis. And he puts them in very stark terms as being, at odds. And so they felt that to stay themselves and to believe in the things they believed in, the values that they had, to hold on to them as long as possible, that was resistance. And I think that they were right. And it's hard to know, I don't want to compare, who had the greater impact, those who rose up, knowing that there's no chance of surviving or having any kind of military impact, or those who did bury these time capsules, and now tonight you're going to see the story of the Warsaw Ghetto from their point of view. They succeeded.
And with very few survivors. So of that group of 60, we see 3 survivors. So this also raises a question for a filmmaker. So you were inspired by historian Samuel Casso's book. So what are the challenges for you as a filmmaker bringing this story to film, and the types of sources you're able to use?
So there's a lot of footage, and photographs of the Warsaw Ghetto, a tremendous amount. There's a problem. This is all shot by the Nazi propaganda unit. I use that footage, and you'll see it in the film very, very carefully. I feel like as a Jewish filmmaker, I get to use that footage because it's the place and it's the people. It is authentic, but you have to just very carefully look at it and evaluate what's propaganda, what's not, and use it very carefully. So we usually think of archival material as being true, and we think of dramatizations as being suspect or false or loosely based on the truth. My film flips this on its head because I think that the dramatizations in the film, I said we were going to talk about this, but the dramatizations in the film are all based on the writing of the Oneg Shabbos archive. So I didn't make anything up. So you'll see a scene towards the beginning of the film where Rachel Auerbach, who's one of the 3 survivors, she's talking about, she's writing after the war about when Ringelblum called her to come see him at the Jewish Self-Help, where he was the leader of the Jewish Self-Help in Warsaw. And she says, he said, you know, how are you? I said, you're home. I said, I'm leaving tomorrow. He said, you can't leave, and on and on and on. This is all from the writing. I didn't make anything up. So in a way, I feel that the stuff that I created, the material I created, is true. And also the writing in the archive is so powerful and so personal. The material shot by the Nazis on the street. It's on the street, and it's from their point of view, it's at a distance. The writing could not be any more intimate. So I felt we needed some kind of imagery to bring us into the homes, bring us into the lives, so that we could care about these people as people. So that's what we did.
Yeah, one aspect that is very effective, we hear very familiar voices. Joan Allen, Adrian Brody are reading the actual words from the documents, which provides a very powerful form of narration. With the Nazi footage, as a filmmaker, did you feel any kind of ethical quandary using that material?
No, because it's authentic material. There was a film called A Film Unfinished. Some of you may have seen it. And it was about this Nazi footage shot in the ghetto. It was a propaganda. They were shooting for a propaganda film that was never made or ever finished. The reels, the original material from that shooting, are at the British Archive in Berlin. So in that footage, and you see it in A Film Unfinished, you'll see a woman, for example, a Jewish woman holding some kind of bundle, and she just steps over a dead body on the street. And go, wow, that's weird. But then you see, take 2, and she does it again, and then take 3. So she's being forced, she's terrified, she's being forced by the Nazis, by the filmmakers to repeat this action several times. And it's meant to show that the Jews don't care about their own. If you don't show that kind of material, if you just show people on the street, or children on the street, or crowds, you have to think about what the images are, what they're saying, and how you can repurpose them. But other than that, I don't feel any ethical quandaries at all. I'm very grateful that that footage exists.
So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the woman who really frames a lot of the narration, Rachel Auerbach. So we're seeing a lot of the story from her experiences. So can you tell us a little bit more about who she was and why you wanted her to play such an important role in the film?
So there are 3, as you'll learn in the film, there were 3 survivors, as you already said, of the Oneg Shabbos archive. There were 60 members of the archive. Rachel Auerbach and Hirsch Wasser, who was one of Ringelblum's 2 executive secretaries, and his wife Bluma, who participated in the archive as well. They were copying everything, making multiple copies, and she was one of the people who were constantly copying material. Rachel Auerbach was the perfect narrator because she knew Ringelblum was part of his milieu before the war. She was part of the archive during the war, and then she lived to tell the tale, and she kept writing for the rest of her life. She wrote, I think, 4 books on the ghetto, on Treblinka, on the Jewish the Jewish intellectuals that were in the ghetto. She felt it was her life's duty to maintain their legacy, to write about them so they would be remembered. So there's just this incredible trove of writing to take from in order to frame the story. And she's an excellent writer. The Onyx Shabbos archive has been ignored, and wrongly so. Rachel Auerbach has, as well. She was a very prolific writer, a really fantastic writer, and I think one of the most important writers, survivor writers. But she has been untranslated. I actually had to have a woman in LA translate her writing because it had never been translated, except for 2 pieces that I'm aware of into English before. So she is a fascinating person. She was a difficult woman. She was involved with Malger, who was a very famous poet. They had a very tumultuous relationship. He was a drunk and he beat her. Not a very pretty story, but he left Poland when the war started. He tried to reunite with her after the war, but she wasn't interested. But when she left, one of the reasons she's so incredibly important is that when she left Poland in 1950, she went to Israel, and she actually was the person who started the Survivor Testimony Department at Yad Vashem. So, the Shoah Foundation is a direct result of the work that she did. Of course, there would have been other testimony was bound to happen, but she was so she was continuing the work of the Onyx Shabbos, right? Getting the stories of everybody, of the average individual. Everybody had a story to tell. And she convinced Gideon Hasner, the prosecutor of Adolf Eichmann, to base the Eichmann trial on survivor testimony. And she sat with him and said, okay, this one rambles endlessly, perhaps as I'm doing now. This one's a pain in the ass. This one's really good on Warsaw. This one's really good on deportations. And she crafted the narrative of the trial with him. And there were 5 cameras running at all times during the testimony, of course, except when Rachel Auerbach was testifying. I had thought that perhaps I would start my film there, but the footage doesn't exist. And when she did speak, there was a transcript because there was a court reporter. She said there's a direct line from the Warsaw Ghetto Amanda Ringelboom, the Onyx Shabbos in this courtroom today. And I would say that there's a direct line from there to the Shoah Foundation and everything that's come from there. She's a really important person, and if you're interested in looking up any of her writing, the one piece that was translated is called Yiskur, and it is a remarkable piece of writing in which she goes through every kind of person who was deported from the ghetto and the loss of this whole murdered world, from children to mothers and grandmothers and students and yeshiva and bochers. It's really an amazing piece of writing, so if you're interested.
So you've created a wide variety of films on Native American history and Gloria Allred, American Jewish pilots fighting for the Israeli Air Force. Did you have a special sense of moral responsibility with this film?
So making this film was totally terrifying because I felt that every film, to make a film like this, it takes many, many years. It's like pushing Sisyphus's rock up the hill. You have to raise the money, you have to make the film, you have to get it out in the world. I'm not complaining. I'm very, very fortunate to have done what I've done. But you have to really care, right? You have to be really, really mad about, usually you have to be really mad about something in order to have the energy to make a film. So in this case, I was really mad that we didn't know about the Onyx Shabbos archive. In Hannah Senish's case, I was really mad that we knew about Anne Frank, who was a young girl who had no opportunity to act, but most people didn't know, more people knew about her than knew about this, but we knew more about this young girl who didn't have an opportunity to act than we did about Hannah Senish, who flung herself behind enemy lines into Yugoslavia to try to save her mother and the Jews of Hungary. What was the question? Responsibility or moral? Yeah, so what was really hideous was, Sam Cassell's book is like this, right? It's like the yellow pages and white pages of the 5 boroughs of New York. And a film can take kind of maybe a haiku. So it was terrible to leave things out, to leave characters out, not characters, people out, who so wanted to be heard and known. And it was even the people that I was able to include in the film and the story. You know, Abraham Lewin's diary is one of the most remarkable pieces of writing you'll see in the film. He was a member of the Onyx Archive. He taught with Ringo Bloom at a Jewish, sort of an upscale Jewish private girls' school. He taught history. He was a Zionist. He spoke Hebrew. He taught at the same school that Ringo Bloom did. That's how they knew each other. And he kept a daily diary. But unlike Ringo Bloom's daily diary, which was the diary of a historian, just facts, never talks about himself, never talks about his family, or very rarely, Lewin is spilling his guts on the page all the time. So, I mean, just his diary alone is so incredible. I could have just, you know, I encourage whatever young filmmakers are here, go make a film based on Lewin's diary. There's plenty there. So that, I did feel a sense of, I felt like if I failed to really engage people, the film wasn't, well, if it was it wasn't going to work. Because we have such a reluctance to engage with the Holocaust and with Holocaust films. Like, oh, God, no. So if it wasn't absolutely perfect or A+ or really engaging, I would have failed them. And you'll have to decide for yourself how it turned out.
I can assure you, you did not fail. It's tremendous, very admirable success. So thinking about our own times, there are good reasons for us to be alarmed by documented cases of anti-Semitism, a rise in anti-Semitism internationally. We're seeing the rise of right-wing nationalist groups in Europe, white nationalism here in the US, acts of vandalism, threats against Jewish journalists, a lot of rhetoric in our political discourse, from veiled dog whistles to strident proclamations. Deborah Lipstadt has a new book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, where she's examining various sources of anti-Semitism, left and right wing, and she writes, "The existence of Jew hatred within a society is an indication that something about the entire society is amiss." So this project is urgently relevant, and perhaps even more so than when you began the project. And so I wonder if your sense of mission has also evolved as our times have evolved over the last several years.
So I started the film in earnest 7 years ago. I had no way of knowing that when the film came out, it would be in this environment. No way. That's why I said bad for the world, good for the film. Because people, and one of the best things about what's happening with this film is that it's spreading beyond the Jewish world. I mean, I love the Jewish film festivals, and I love the Jewish audience, and I love the dialogue that I've had with Jewish audiences over the years. But this film is going way beyond the Jewish audience. I was just at the Berlin Film Festival. The film was invited there to screen in the Berlinale special section, even though the film had already been screened and even broadcast in Germany. So the head of the film festival, when he invited the film, he also invited the right-wing parties to come to the screening, and he said he would pay for their tickets. So I was hoping for a kerfuffle, like with signs, but no like totally crazy people with guns. And we had a kerfuffle. We had 4 neo-Nazis who came, and they staged a fist fight with themselves. They say that they were attacked outside the screening for Writer History. But I think it was like, the Reichstag fire. I think they hit themselves, for press. But it's been picked up all over the world. It's great. So that's really, really, really important that the film is spreading more widely. Because we're doing a lot of work, or gearing up to do a lot of work with education. So I'm cutting down the film to classroom length with Facing History in Ourselves, and that will be doing a study guide for North America. I'm working with an amazing group in Poland called Forum for Dialogue, and what they've been doing for 20 years is they go into a town. It was started by a non-Jewish Polish guy. They go into a town that used to have a big Jewish population. They go to the high school, and they say, How many of you knew that your town used to be a third Jewish or half Jewish or three-quarters Jewish? The kids don't know. They say, okay, go find out about it. So the kids go, and they interview their parents and their grandparents and whatever elders are still alive. They go to the library, and then they come back after a week and they have to make a presentation to the whole town about the Jewish history of the town. Sometimes it takes the form of a tour. This is where the synagogue, this tractor factory is where the synagogue was, and on and on and on. So they're taking the film in its shortened version. They've already done the Polish study guide to high schools all over Poland, which I'm very, very, very excited about. And I hope to do the same kind of work all over Europe.
Yeah, I'm sure that, I believe we have some Colorado Holocaust educators here who would be interested in learning how the film could be incorporated in the classroom. I personally would love to incorporate it in my courses at DU. Really tremendous educational opportunity. I feel like maybe we should open up the floor for questions.
So if you raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic to ask a question.
And it can be on anything. Film, documentary, Jewish history, how you feel today, complaints about your children, anything that you'd like, since you haven't seen the film. Oh, he's raising his hand to
He wants to
complain.
complain about his children.
Not today. Have you had any negative reactions to the film? And if you have, could you speak to them? It sounds like it's been very well received, and certainly hearing more about in Europe, cities want to engage more with their history. I'm just curious if you've seen the flip side of that.
So are you talking about critical reaction or, yeah.
I would say not so much critical on the quality of the film, but just more of the content, besides that, oh, this is just another Holocaust film.
No, there hasn't really been. I mean, the biggest place where that would happen is in Poland. I'm sure many of you are aware that Poland passed a law about a year ago saying it was basically illegal to conflate the Nazi Holocaust with Poland, or that Poles had any responsibility. Of course, 100,000 Polish Jews were murdered by their Polish neighbors after the Holocaust when they tried to return home. But actually, when Ringelblum, he spent 9 months in a bunker, and he was writing a book called Polish-Jewish Relations. But we showed the film in an unfinished form, almost finished form, at the New Poland Museum in Warsaw on April 18th. It was the eve of the Warsaw Ghetto, 75th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. There were a lot of Polish dignitaries and government officials and blah, 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 who really wanted to be arrested. Because I thought it'd be great publicity for the film, but it didn't happen. So, so far so good. So far so good.
So I know that at least right now, the archives are currently out of print, that they were at one point published by Yad Vashem and available there, and that they no longer are. Are you hoping that the publicity from this film will hopefully get them republished?
I wasn't aware that the archives were no longer available at Yad Vashem. The archive has been fully digitized, and I thought that both Yad Vashem and the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum were portals for that material. So I wasn't aware that that was some retraction from Yad Vashem. So you know something I don't know.
I don't know if it's like, I'm sure I can find it online, but that in book form, at least right now, you can get it on like Amazon, like secondhand, which is what I did. But that at least at the moment, you can no longer like buy it.
So, but you can get it through. You can research the archive through the Jewish Historical Institute, and I think I already said that they're just beginning to publish translations in English. I think they've done 2 volumes, so it's accessible.
And also, do you think that if the archive, that so much of it was lost, that if it had been more complete, people would know more about it?
No, because there's 60,000 pages of material that were found. So I don't think that the fact that one of the 3 caches was never found, I don't think that's why we don't know about it. Although that material was it was written or collected in the months before the uprising, so it would have been quite fascinating. important to have.
I don't even. With all the information that you had, and you said you were only able to put a little bit in, did you have a certain criteria that you used to pick and choose what stories to tell?
So, I guess the question was, did I have a certain criteria to pick and choose what stories to tell? Well, it was very complex because you had to tell the history of the, how much, okay, so the history of Polish Jews is a very long 1,000-year history. Where do you start? So I started between the wars. Incredibly complex civilization in full bloom right then, and there's a couple of minutes in the film, right? And then in terms of from the archive itself, I had to tell the story of the archive, the creation of the archive, the way the archive functioned, what happened to the people in it, what happened to the archive itself, how it was found, and I had to tell the history of the Warsaw Ghetto. I had to tell the larger story of the war and the Holocaust. So part of it was just sort of getting the beats, but then I decided on a couple of characters, and each character had to have their own arc. So you had to combine their individual stories and writing with what was happening in general, the progression of what was happening in the ghetto. So the writing had to be good. It had to be have succinct excerpts that I could, because nothing is complete in the film, and it had to fit in with. It had to tell some, in a nutshell, some important part of the story.
Hi, thank you. I'm curious to learn a little bit about where you stand on the politics of Holocaust memory. And so on the one hand, you have an idea illustrated by Godwin's rule that if the Holocaust it comes into a conversation, the conversations become absurd if comparison has been made, to the Holocaust. On the other hand, you have those who think that sort of comparing things to the Holocaust, diminishes the importance of Holocaust memory. I think Evelyn Rosenfeld has an essay to this effect. So I'm kind of curious to know a little bit more about how you think about comparisons to the Holocaust, especially when it comes to contemporary politics.
So it's a very complicated question, and I think your brain is working much better than mine. But I will tell you that I think it's important to. I think it's important to remember, period. The members of the Oneg Shabbos archive wanted two things when they realized they were going to die. They wanted to tell the story to be told to future generations from their point of view, from their writing, and they wanted to be remembered as individuals. So I think there's just the memory for memory's sake is just a sacred responsibility to honor these people. I am loath to make comparisons because I do think it was a unique rift in civilization. It's not a Jewish problem, it's a humanity problem. I don't like when Jews say never again and mean never again for Jews. Because there have been genocides that have occurred, but to compare genocides is stupid, I think. But I do think that we get to draw, what's the point of studying history if we don't see some of the warning signs, right? And I'm not saying that we're about to have a Holocaust in the world, anywhere in the world. I'm just saying that, here's an anecdote. I'm not being as articulate as I'd like to be in answering your question, because maybe I don't know the answer, or I'm somewhere in between. I don't think there's anything wrong with making comparisons, and I don't think we should make comparisons. So I just learned just like 3 weeks ago that when Hitler first came to power in 1933, when there was still a free press, that whenever there were any articles or reports criticizing him or the Nazi Party, he called it fake news. I found that to be very, very shocking. I'm not saying that Trump is Hitler. I'm just saying, wow, that's weird. Maybe we should look at that. That's my very intellectual answer. Wow, that's weird.
Do we have other questions from those sitting in the back?
Do you feel like there's opportunity for you to do some additional follow-up to this? coverage of the story.
So the Onyx Trails archive is so complex. I think there's a million stories in there. Will I personally make another film that's based on the archive? I don't think so. And the follow-up is the educational work.
Well, if you regret asking a question now, after the screening, which we'll go over to in just a few moments, so you can take your seats, after the screening there'll be time again to ask Roberta some questions. In the meantime, unless there's no other questions, I will thank you all for attending, and I will ask you to please thank Dr. Campbell and Roberta for attending. Thank you.
Before we all disperse, I do have a point that I wanted to mention. So Adam mentioned the Center for Art Collection and Ethics that I'm directing at the University of Denver. We're going to have programs related to Holocaust-era art. So it's a big part of the mission of that center is to raise awareness of ongoing issues related to Nazi-looted art that has ended up in collections all over the world. So we promote awareness of these issues through social media, and we are going to be providing training on campus for especially emerging professionals who want to go out in the museum world and to understand the kind of research that needs to be done on works of art so that curators and museum directors know that the works in their collections do not have a history of Nazi art plunder. A lot of looted art worked its way to the United States after World War II. So museums today are doing a lot of catch-up work and carrying out this research. We're planning a program for mid-April that will be about a claimant who is here locally and has been a successful claimant with some German museums. She is also a descendant of Karl Laemmle. You may have seen the film last weekend featuring his story. It is really an inspiring story about human connections around these objects, both from the claimant and her family, from the German curators relating to their ancestors, reconciling with their history, and then this amazing transatlantic friendship that has developed between the museum curators in Germany and this family in the United States. So we're planning an event on the DU campus that will screen another documentary that's about their family's quest for restitution, hopefully bringing those two German women, an auction house owner and a provenance researcher, to campus, and also with the viewpoint of the claimant about why it's so important to have that belated measure of justice, to have that tangible connection to her family. So if you're interested in following us and receiving information about that kind of event, there's some flyers on the tables in the back. You can also come up and speak to me after the program. I'd be happy to make sure that you receive information about those programs. So thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thanks again, Beth. Thank you very much, Roberta. Very interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 23rd Denver Jewish Film Festival, presented by the Stern Family Foundation. We're also deeply grateful to the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, or SCFD. At this time, please turn off all electronic devices and no texting during the screening. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Adam Rovner from the University of Denver Center for Judaic Studies. I see a lot of people out here tonight. Thank you very much for coming out to support Jewish arts and culture, which is a big part of what we do at the Center for Judaic Studies at DU. Our Holocaust Awareness Institute is the proud sponsor of this film, and those of you who were able to attend the dessert reception before this had a really insightful chance to speak with director Roberta Grossman, who is an award-winning director and producer of many, many films,
And this one is, I think, a especially moving and compelling film. Please make sure to cast your vote for tonight's film, which is in the running for the Business Den Audience Award for Best Documentary. All you have to do is fold over one corner of that, and I can remind you that 4 stars is the best. After the film, if you'd like to stay in your seats, there will be a short Q&A with our fabulous director, Roberta Grossman. Please.
Hi, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. When it was snowing today during the day, I thought nobody was going to come, but here you are. I guess you're more used to snow here than I am in Los Angeles. Thank you very much to the Denver Jewish Film Festival for bringing Who Write Our History and for bringing me to share it with you. This film is a labor of love. I worked on it for 7 years, and I think it's the most important underground story of the Holocaust. And I look forward to talking with you after the film. Bye-bye. So, questions, comments? If the mic gets to you, that, okay. So do you, questions? Okay, she's coming.
How did you get interested in this story?
How did I get interested in the story? I was working on another film at the time, and I read a review of Sam Kassow's book, and then I went and got the book and started reading it, and about 20 pages in, I realized it was an incredible story, and I was shocked that I didn't know it. And I started talking to people and realized most people didn't know about Emanuel Ringelblum and Atlantic Shop's archive, and to me that seemed outrageous. So I wanted to make a film that would hopefully bring the story to millions of people around the world. I can also, Amy, just call people, oh, there you go, right next to you.
When I was in Warsaw, I saw nothing left from the Warsaw Ghetto. Not a memorial. I think there's one little brick wall. What do you think that means? Anything?
I think it means, number one, that the Germans destroyed the city of Warsaw, both the ghetto, first the ghetto, they just bombed it to smithereens, and then with the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, the rest of the city was destroyed. I don't think that Poland has done as good of a job memorializing and dealing with the death of 6 or 3 million of their citizens and their own participation in it, as well as their own victimization by the Nazis. And I think that when, because they haven't really fully dealt with it and grappled with it on a national basis, it's a cancer, and it's a cancer that leads to nationalism, anti-Semitism, nationalism, and fascism. That's my opinion.
I've got a lot of voice ideas.
Okay.
How much of this was shot in Warsaw, and were the Polish people welcoming, because there are still stories that they still don't care for the Jews?
So the question was, how much of this was shot in Warsaw, and were the Polish people welcoming? The building that was the Jewish Self-Help, where I shot the Jewish Self-Help, that is in Warsaw. I shot one day on a stage in Warsaw. We built the underground bunker on a stage. I mean, it wasn't built in a day, but it was shot in a day. But most of the film was shot in the city of Łódź, because it wasn't bombed, and so it still had sections that looked like Warsaw. The Polish cast and crew were fantastic, very, very committed to telling the story, and very honored to be part of it. And they couldn't have been more professional, more engaged, more passionate, more committed. Does everybody feel that way? No, but you know, they're just like everywhere else. You know, they're pretty. The people that I was working with were very upset about the rise of the right-wing rise in their country and the change of governments.
I'm interested in your choice to do recreations. I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
So he used a bad word, he used the R word, recreations. He asked about my choice to do dramatizations, and why, I guess, or, yeah. So, well, I think sometimes I chose to do it because I have like a death wish or something, because most people really hate dramatizations and recreations, and what I usually say is you don't hate recreations, you hate bad recreations. In this case, I felt I didn't have a choice, because we have the Nazi footage that was shot in the ghetto by the Nazi propaganda unit, which you saw as the black and white footage, archival footage, and that's usually considered true. Archival footage is, authentic, believable, but actually it was shot for the purpose of showing the Jews in the worst possible light. And then you have my dramatizations, which are taken completely from the archive, word for word. Like, for example, the scene where Wasser's walking through the ghetto, and he stops to hear a man playing the violin. That comes from the rest of something that you heard in the film, which Wasser says, the ghetto is filled with music, the belly is empty, but the ears are full. And then he goes, which was in the film, and then he goes on to say in the next sentence, this is his diary in the ghetto, it's worth stopping in the street in the dark and cold to hear Mendelssohn's Concerto and E minor coming out of into darkened, or flowing into darkened hearts, or darkened souls, something like that. So the writing in the archive is so powerful, and there was nothing to show. And so I felt like I needed, in order for us to feel these people and not just keep them at a distance, like some archival thing a million years ago, but to really feel them, I felt this is what was required, because there's no survivors, the place doesn't exist, so it was a choice I made. I wanted the film to have the gravitas of a documentary and the emotional pull of a dramatic feature. So that was the goal. And like the production design team worked with a Polish scholar for 6 months before we shot. Every pen, every book, everything was carefully vetted. So there was a tremendous, like the soup kitchen, there was, in 1940, the Joint Distribution Committee that was still able to send money and sent a photographer into the ghetto and shot orphanages and soup kitchens. And if you were to look at those photographs and look at the sets, you'd see the attention that was paid to detail and historical accuracy. Yes, over there.
How will the recent Polish laws that were passed forbidding the condemnation of the Polish people being accessories to the crime affect works like yours being done going forward?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, we got money from the Polish Film Institute, which is a government institute, but we applied before the new government came in. I think that if we had been, a month later, we wouldn't have gotten funding. I don't think that this current government is going to fund films like this.
Every week I teach the books of the Eish Kodesh, the Piaseczner Rebbe. I know he was part of the Oneg Shabbos group. I was just wondering why you didn't make him part of your film.
So he actually was not part of the Oneg Shabbos group. Rabbi Huberman, who was part of the Oneg Shabbos, who you saw in the film, he was a part of the community around the, I would say his name, the Eish Kodesh Rabbi. He was part of that group, and he actually took many of the writings and deposited them in the archive. It's interesting that Rebbe, there were a lot of really famous Rebbes in the ghetto, and after the Great Deportation, those that were left, they were given, community got together and arranged for them to have a job in a workshop together, and they would sit together and discuss Torah while they were supposed to be making shoes or whatever they were doing. And actually, Ringelblum was taken to the Trovinki labor camp when the uprising started, and that Rebbe was there too, and that's where he died. The question is, what efforts are being made to find a third cache? 10 years ago, approximately, an Israeli team of archaeologists and sophisticated equipment got permission from the Chinese government to dig in the courtyard, which is where the brush workshop was, and they didn't find anything. They found some artifacts from the ghetto period, but nothing from the cache. And Sam Cassow thinks one of two things happened. One, it could have been destroyed there in the bombing. There was heavy fighting there in the ghetto uprising, and there was also bombing, a lot of fire bombing and also aerial bombing in that area, so it could have been destroyed then. The other thing is that it could have been tossed, right? Found and tossed, because there was a real gold rush after the war, even before the war ended, in areas where Jews had been either collected or ghettos or camps, because many of the Poles believed that all the Jews were rich, and of course many did bury gold or jewels in the hopes of coming back to dig them up. So there was a real gold rush, and everywhere the Jews had been digging, and so it's quite possible that there was digging there in that area of the ghetto, and that the cache was found, and people were very disappointed to find papers and not valuables. And we know this because when the second cache was the 2 milk cans, was found, as it said in the cards at the end, was found while Polish construction workers were building new housing, new apartment buildings on the site of the former ghetto, and they were about to, they opened it up, they thought, well, this is a life-changing discovery. They opened it up and it was papers, and they were about to toss them, and the foreman, luckily, was there, not on his lunch break, and he came running over and said, do not touch those papers, I know what they are, this is very important, and he took them to the Jewish Historical Institute. How did he know? He was a non-Jewish Pole who had a Jewish girlfriend in the ghetto, and this man had served as a courier in and out of the ghetto, so he knew what it was. So, it's just like this miraculous, yeah. I think we promised the balcony, right? Yeah, go ahead. The question is, are there plans to digitize the archive? And the answer is no, because it's already been done. So the archive has been completely digitized. As far as I understand it, you can access it either through the Jewish Historical Institute, where it's housed in Warsaw, their online presence, or through the Yad Vashem, or from the United States Memorial Holocaust Museum. But I'm not exactly sure, because I just dealt with the Jewish Historical Institute. They've also been translating the material. That's 60,000 pages. And they just completed, I think this year, 31 volumes, translating the entire archive into Polish. And now they're working on English translations. So, yes, right here.
Do you know why the original documentation is still in Polish?
The question is why the original documentation is still in Polish. And I think there could have been like a why, for God's sake, in there somewhere. I've often dreamt of like an Entebbe type raid, right? To extract the archive. So the archive is a very complicated thing, and the archive is jointly owned by the Jewish Historical Institute and an organization called the Association of the Jewish Historical Institute. But the actual institute, the functioning, is owned by the Polish government, and the building is owned by the Polish government. So it's very complex. And actually, they did a very good job, sort of riding the waves of history, keeping low in the Soviet period. There was more forthcoming in the Solidarity period now. It's very complicated. And as a matter of fact, there's some efforts being made to open a new Warsaw Ghetto Uprising Museum. And we do not need this, right? And it's a really, I think the whole thing is an effort to grab the archive. So if anybody who's interested and wants to support the protection of the archive, look up the Jewish Historical Institute and see, and there's something called the Onik Shabbos program, and see, it's a nonprofit, see if, how you can support it. I think just being aware of it all over the world is really important.
I was just going to ask, you talked about the German portrayals of the ghetto and the Jewish ones, but what about Poles who had access? Were there any people who tried to document it from a Polish perspective?
I'm sorry, because of the way you were holding the mic, not criticism, but I didn't understand what you said. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, were there Polish recordings of what was going on at that time as well? You talked about German portrayals and Jewish portrayals, but what about Poles who had access to the ghetto during the time?
I don't know. That's a really good question, and actually the first time I've been asked that question, so congratulations. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we saw in the film that Poles were in the ghetto. Actually, the most famous one is Jan Karski, who was a member of the Polish Underground, and he was brought into the ghetto so that he could go out because he was going to be sent out by the Polish government exile to the West to try to get support from the Allies. But his personal mission was to try to tell what was going on in the ghetto. And in Claude Lanzmann's Shoah, he's interviewed, and he talks about walking through the ghetto on 2 occasions. So if you're interested, get Shoah, and it's like 9 hours, so find where Jan Karski's interview is. It's quite moving. So you're talking about like the Einsatzgruppen, yes. So the question is, are the mass graves still there in Poland and covered up? And the answer is yes. The Einsatzgruppen, of course, wasn't just in Poland; it was in all over Eastern Europe. The Einsatzgruppen was the Nazi, the SS units that went out often with the help of locals, and would bring all the Jews together in the center of the town, march them out to a nearby field, and then make them dig their own graves and shoot them. As a matter of fact, Sam Kassow's mother survived one of those shootings. So, and there's a priest who's currently been doing a lot of research, Father Dubois. Yeah, he's great. And if you can read his book, because he's been doing all the research. Oh yeah. I believe so, yeah.
Can you talk about the sourcing of the original film from German sources, and then how you made it look contemporaneous with the addition of color, actors, and dramatization? So how do you piece all those things together?
So the first question was how did I source the German material? It's at the Bundesarchiv, it's a national archive, just like the Library of Congress or the Smithsonian. You hire a researcher or you search online, and you work with low resolution copies in the editing room, and then you tell them which frames you want or which sections, and they send it to you, and you pay handsomely for it. And the second question was I didn't colorize any archival footage. There's footage at the beginning of the film of Jewish Warsaw, and I think it was shot in '38. It's in color, and there's a little piece of archival footage in the ghetto, also shot in color. What I did do is put my actors in archival footage, black and white, but I made no attempt to hide the fact because they start in black and white and then they come to color. That was done with green screen on a separate stage while we were shooting with archival photograph or footage, special, equipment where the camera could see, and then the actor would be saying, oh, move a little left, move a little right, okay, now look at the person here. So I hope I'm answering your question. Yes?
With actors, obviously, with those dramatizations, say the R word, how do you decide what is more important that? Is it more important that the actor emotionally portray this, or is it more important that the actor looks as much like their historical counterpart as possible?
Okay, that's great. Another question I've never been asked. The question was, in casting the actors, was it more important that they were able to emote in a way that I wanted them to, or that they looked like the character that they were portraying? Of course, it was more important that they have good performances. It just so happens that they look a lot like their characters, and also it's wardrobe and hair, the way their hair was cut, and anything else.
Okay.
Please say it again.
So, has it been
So the question is, has the film been permitted freely to be shown in Poland? The answer is yes. On January 27th, which was this year's International Holocaust Remembrance Day, well, it's every year on 27th, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we had 355 screenings in 55 countries around the world all on the same day, and 50 screenings were in Poland. And I'm also working with a really excellent a group called Forum for Dialogue in Poland. They're creating Polish study guides, and it'll be taking the film to Polish high schools. Yes? How I would like you to support the film? No, well, what I was asking for is, if you're interested in supporting the Jewish Historical Institute, holding on to the archive, then you should go to the Jewish Historical Institute and see how you could donate there. In terms of supporting the film, the best thing that you could do is tell your friends to see it. Go to the film's Facebook page, like it on Facebook. Also, at whoriderhistory.com, you can sign up for the film's email list, and I try not to harangue people more than 3 or 4 times a year. Yes. The question is, since most of the actors were Polish, the question is, did I teach them Yiddish? And the answer is yes and no. The actors spoke their Yiddish lines in Yiddish. Sam Casso said most of them weren't speaking Yiddish really, and we had to. The women did a good job. Rachel Auerbach and Judita, they were okay. He said they were A, Ringo Bloom was a B, and the others who remain unnamed were like C through F. He said that perhaps Poles were sort of like genetically incapable of speaking Yiddish properly. So we did it's called ADR, dialogue replacement. They had coaches, they had dialogue coaches, Yiddish speakers, before we shot. Sam was on the set while we shot, as was another dialogue coach. So we made efforts, but it was difficult. So we did dialogue replacement with the actors who you see on screen. Ringo Bloom bumped up his performance, and it's still in the film, but the others were still not acceptable. To the 50 people who still speak Yiddish. And we used actors like 2 months ago from the Yiddish Fiddler in New York, and they did the dialogue. I was on the phone, I was on the phone from LA, Sam was on the phone from Connecticut, they were in New York in a studio, and we redid the Yiddish again with the actors syncing to the scenes. So it was really a challenge. Yeah. The question is asking, did working on the film for 7 years change me? And I'm not sure yet. I used to think that I wasn't emotionally affected because I have read about the Holocaust since I was in junior high. And I've made other films. I made a film on Homosenish. Always reading, always watching films, and I used to think it didn't affect me, and now I know it has deeply affected me. I think that the way that this film has affected me most is that I feel like a sense of gratitude that I was in the position and the place in my career to tell this story and to tell it in the way that I did. And to me, people ask me, how do you live with this material? To me, it was just a complete honor to tell their story. And maybe we'll end on this note, because I feel like the members of, and I know I'm not completely answering your question, but it's a little profound for me. And the members of the Onyx Shabbos wanted 2 things when they realized they weren't going to survive. One was to tell the story of the war, of the ghetto, of the Jewish experience in the Holocaust from the Jewish point of view. And the other was to be remembered as individuals. And I feel like just every single one of you, by sitting here and watching the film, have fulfilled their wishes. So thank you very much and good night.